that. So for anybody who doesn't know my story and we're thinking that I'm too young to know anything about Parkinson's or have it, thank you. And for those of you who didn't think that, feel free to buy me a gift certificate for the spa. Maybe I need a facial. There's two things that most people know about Parkinson's, even if you really don't know much about it. Can anybody shout one out maybe that strikes your mind? Shaking? Yeah. So the two things most people know about it are that you shake and old people get it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Both of those statements are true and false. But I'll go backwards a little bit first to the start of my story. The end of June of 2013, I started to have weird things happening to my body. My right side of my body in particular, my pinky finger would twitch out of control. I shook a little bit, nothing major, but I started to have trouble to hold a pen and write. Use a mouse, basically anything that required the use of my right hand, and I had an office job, so you kind of have to be able to hold a pen to write when you're right-handed. By the time August hit, things had gotten bad enough that I had to stop working, which was frustrating because I didn't know why I had to stop working, because I didn't know what was wrong. So a series of testing and things started. I have a strong family history of MS, so I was tested for that among some other things, and all of those things were ruled out. And so the next 9 months, I had some pretty dark days. Nobody could figure out what was wrong. I had days when I had trouble walking. I had days when I had trouble getting out of bed. And I had a lot of days where my then 6-year-old Samantha, she'll be 7 next month, would come to me crying and cry herself to sleep, asking if Mommy was going to die and what was wrong with me. So that was anybody that has kids, that's a pretty awful thing. And when you don't know what's wrong with yourself, how do you explain it to a 6-year-old? My 3-year-old, Isabella, she didn't really know any different, but I also have a husband that works in Alberta, so I was home alone with 2 kids and sometimes not able to walk around my house normally. So it was a pretty rough 9 months of my life, and I started to get depressed. I started to eat a lot. My waist got quite large, and I started to think that I was crazy because none of the doctors were figuring out what was wrong. And so I kind of was starting to lose my mind a little bit. But thankfully, I have a really great family doctor who knew that I was too young to have my body falling apart, and he pushed and pushed until I got sent off of the island. So on the 3rd of April of 2014 was the day my life changed forever. I saw a neurologist at the St. John Regional Hospital, and he did some tests, watched me walk, watched me try and hold a pen to write and draw some weird designs and things. And about a half an hour later, we were in his office, and he looked at me and he said, "I think you have Parkinson's disease." So that was a bit of a kick in the gut. I didn't know anything about Parkinson's except that old people get it and that people shake. And so it was, needless to say, a bit of a shocking moment. It was like the wind was knocked right out of me. Oddly enough, I remember the first thing that I said to him was, "Thank you for telling me I'm not crazy." So he reassured me that no, I wasn't crazy, that something was wrong. And about a month after that, he had me back at that same hospital where I saw a movement disorder neurologist who specializes in Parkinson's. Sadly, PEI doesn't have one of those, so I traveled to St. John twice a year to see him. And given my age, I had all the signs, and he agreed that that's likely what I had, but didn't want to misdiagnose or label me with something and me not have it. So I left that day with a prescription in hand for something called levodopa, which is the gold standard medication that's used to treat Parkinson's. And basically, he told me if you have Parkinson's disease, you're going to feel a whole lot better fast. And if you don't, it will do nothing for you. So I drove 4.5 hours home that day. I was by myself. My husband was in Alberta. And I was very conflicted. I wanted to be able to play with my kids again. I wanted to be able to walk around my house normally and use my hand and do crafts and all of those things that I used to do. But I didn't want to have Parkinson's, so I didn't know if I wanted medication to work or if I didn't want it to. So it was a long drive home with my own thoughts. But I came home and I started the treatment, and it was a slow dosing process over a course of 6 months. And lo and behold, quite quickly, I was able to walk normally again, and I was able to do some fun things with my kids again, and life started to get a million times better than it had been in the 6 months or 8 months previous to that. So in September 19th of last fall, that diagnosis was confirmed that I have young onset Parkinson's, which is no different than having Parkinson's. It just means that you got it young. When he diagnosed me, I wasn't upset in the least. I had seen how much better life was. And I had 6 months to get used to the idea and to read about it. So I oddly enough wasn't upset that day. But what made me upset was he told me that my medication had been working. It works well for about 4 hours for stiffness and being able to move well. But it only works for about 2 hours for fine motor skills. So if I need to hold a pen to write a note or do up some buttons or anything like that, if my mother would stop buying my children dresses with buttons, that'd be great. But those fine motor details with my right hand, the medication only works for about 2 hours. And that day he told me that that probably wasn't going to improve, which took away my hope of figuring out what was wrong and returning to my career. So I suffered, I still do, with the loss of identity of having to give up my job. I left PEI at 17 to go to college in Nova Scotia and worked in Halifax for 10 years and in Alberta for 5, and I had a pretty good career. And I come home and had a great job at Cows as the general manager. Who doesn't want to work for a company that makes ice cream and chocolate? I was everybody's favorite person. So I struggled with that, with having to give up work. And I still do, but I try and fill my time in other ways. No employer can expect, or no employee can expect an employer to have you work from, 8:30 for 2 hours and then leave for, a few hours until your meds kick in again. So it just wasn't feasible. So to backtrack a little bit, for those of you who don't know anything about Parkinson's, it's a progressive neurological disease. Progressive is a scary word. It means it will get worse over time, and there's no cure for it. Most people who get diagnosed are over 65, so hence the true that it's an old person's disease. But that's also false, because there are about 10 to 15% of us that will get the disease young, and you're considered young onset if you get it under the age of about 50 or 55. Oddly enough, I always like to stand out and be unique, and I guess with Parkinson's that's no different. They don't really know what causes Parkinson's, and there's no cure for it, but there's an area of your brain called the substantia nigra, and that area of your brain produces a chemical called dopamine. And dopamine gets released into your body, and that's what makes you be able to walk, and your arms swing when you walk, and you can do smooth movements, you can stand up straight. And when you have Parkinson's, the cells that produce that, they start to die. And often when people get diagnosed, about 80% of those cells those brain-producing cells have already died. And that's what causes the motor issues that people see. So some of the common motor symptoms that people might know about are the tremors. So yes, that's a big part of the disease, but there are actually people with Parkinson's that don't have tremors, so that statement is also false as well. Tremors are the least of my worries. I do have a shake. I'm shaking today, but part of that is nerves and part of it is Parkinson's, and it's a bad combination. But I do shake if I exercise, and those muscles in my right side get used. I shake a lot. Parkinson's has taken the ability for me to hide negative emotions like being nervous or anxious or stressed away. It very much presents itself in a physical, shaky kind of way. So tremors, but some people don't have a tremor at all when they have Parkinson's. Slowness and rigidity and poor balance, those are also big motor issues. But there's a lot of non-motor issues that go with the disease that most people can't see and are usually more difficult for a person with PD to deal with than the actual motor, because the motor symptoms are well controlled for the most part with medication, whereas the non-motor symptoms aren't. Some of those are loss of sense of smell, which they think now might be something they can use as a testing for a precursor for someone that might have Parkinson's. It's often something that people experience long before they have any other symptoms. I haven't lost my sense of smell, but it's decreased. I can't smell some things. Other things like peppermint, for some odd reason, I can smell. But for the most part, I have a weaker sense of smell, I guess, for most things. And that's something that was apparent for a really long time. And I'd be in a room full of people, and they'd say, "Can't you smell that?" And I'd, "No." But I paid no attention to it. I just chalked that off, that I guess maybe my sniffer wasn't as good as everybody else's in the room. So fatigue and insomnia are huge for people with PD. Pretty much everybody that has it have that. Depression is also huge. About 35 to 50% of people with PD will have depression, and it's not necessarily depression from having the disease. It's often a symptom that you have long before you have any of the other motor symptoms. Bladder and bowel dysfunction, everybody loves talking about that, but those are symptoms as well. As soft speech. Soft speech is something that enabled my husband to win an argument finally. All you men in the room that are married knows that that doesn't happen very often. We were arguing a lot because he was saying, "Natasha, I can't hear you, you're mumbling." And for anybody that knows me, I'm a loudmouth, I always have been. So the thoughts of him telling me he couldn't hear me were just absolutely ridiculous. And we would fight, and I'd say, "No, you're just being a man and you're not listening to me." So the day that at one of the neurologist appointments that he was at with me, he asked me, he said, "Are people complaining they can't hear you? Is your voice getting softer and your voice changing?" To which I slunched down in my chair, and he perked up in the corner and said, "Yes." So that was a day that I finally had to admit for once that my husband was right. Stooped posture is huge for me in particular. When my medication's working throughout the day, most people won't know that I have Parkinson's unless I tell them. If you were at my house in the morning when the alarm goes off, you would see an entirely different person. When I wake up in the morning after going all night with no medication, I pretty much can't walk. It's difficult to get out of bed. When I do get out of bed, I'm hunched over like a 90-year-old crippled lady. And my feet usually won't lift off the floor. They just shuffle just along the floor and slide along. And I have a really hard time moving until about 45 minutes to an hour after I take my meds. And then I'll start to slowly stand straighter and straighter and be able to pick my feet up off the floor. So not many people can say they wake up 90 and get younger as the day goes on, but that's my day every day. In the last year, I've learned the trick for me is that I keep a pill bottle on my nightstand and a glass of water. I set my alarm for an hour before I have to get my little one up to get ready for school. And I pop my pill and I lay in bed for the next hour, and then I'm actually able to stand up like a normal 37-year-old would and walk through my house. Facial expression is something that if you have friends or family with Parkinson's, they often think you're cranky all the time. Or you're upset about something. For some reason, over time, we lose the ability to make normal facial expressions and to look happy and those things. And dyskinesia, if anybody's ever seen an interview with Michael J. Fox, you'll notice that he makes very jerky, rhythmic movements, and he has a hard time sitting still. Most people think that that's what Parkinson's looks like, but it's actually a side effect of levodopa, the medication you take. Everybody that takes levodopa will eventually get that side effect. The average span is about 5 to 7 years' time. The lower the dose you can stay on and the less frequency you take it, the longer you'll go before you get it. So I work pretty hard to try and minimize how much of that I need so that I don't have to deal with that for as long as possible. And maybe by the time I do, there'll be a treatment option for it, because right now there isn't. So Parkinson's is often referred to like a snowflake. No two cases are alike. Everybody struggles. Some people struggle really badly with tremors, whereas others don't. Some suffer with stiffness and whatnot. That's my biggest issue. And others, that might not bother them. So as far as my snowflake goes, I take that levodopa 4 times a day. And again, I try to do whatever I can to keep it at that. And in order to keep it at that, I have a care team. In addition to my movement disorder neurologist in St. John, I also have a massage therapist, a physiotherapist, a naturopathic doctor who gives me all kinds of wild and wacky supplements and herbs that I take a tremendous amount of. Costs me a fortune, but if it means I don't need other kind of meds, then that's okay. And recently I've added an acupuncturist to that list of my care team. And the reason that got added is at my most recent appointment in March, I had talked to the doctor about the fact that my hand always looks like that. I can straighten it, but I have to force it straight. And it wasn't just hurting when I would try and write or use it, but it was starting to ache and hurt all the time. And it turns out I've developed something called dystonia in that hand, which is another movement disorder that people with Parkinson's can get, or you can get on its own. And between that and the fact that my medication only works for about 2 hours for fine motor skills, his solution for that was to add another drug. So I left that day much more upset than when I found out I had Parkinson's, because I bust my ass to try and do everything right and everything I can to avoid that. So I came home upset, and I threw myself a hell of a pity party for a week. And about a week after, I kicked myself in the rear and said, this isn't helping anything, and you're feeling crappy, and it's going to make you worse. So I registered for boot camp. Anybody that's ever done a boot camp knows it sucks. It sucks, and it's hard, and it's something that I used to do able-bodied, and it was hard then, but boy, is it hard when you have Parkinson's and you start to shake when you exercise. The staff at Stratford, where I go, they were all shown my picture ahead of time. They were all told that I had Parkinson's and what my issues were, and that if I started to shake like an epileptic, to not panic and call 911, she just has Parkinson's. So I shake my way through it, and I feel much better between that and getting acupuncture in my hand for the dystonia. I've been able to avoid needing that extra drug, and I'll hopefully keep on that path as long as I can. Exercise is the only known way to slow the progression of the disease. It's proven to do so. And the more vigorous the exercise, the longer you'll be healthy, and it can actually trick the brain cells that are left that produce that dopamine to create more. So I'm pretty adamant about exercising at least 4 or 5 times a week. In addition to boot camp, I also bike. I run. I have short little 5'4" legs that were not meant for running, and I suck at it. But my legs work better than my arms do, so I try and run. In October, I did my first 5K. I ran the 5K and the PEI marathon with a group full of very supportive ladies that ran slowly with me and kept telling me that I could finish. And I crossed the finish line sporting a tank top that my employers had made for me that says "Screw you, Parkinson's" on it. So that was awesome. I also horseback ride once a week. I take horseback riding lessons. I was riding this morning. I'm now learning how to jump with a horse, which is terrifying when you're a parky, as we sometimes call ourselves. But riding not only is horse is amazing, it's good for your soul, but it works on your leg strength, your balance, and your posture. You're constantly using all of those muscles when you're riding. And as mentioned, I have an obsession with heels. Much to my husband's dismay, my closet and collection continues to grow, and I refuse to let Parkinson's make me get rid of my shoes. So I horseback ride once a week so that I can keep my shoe collection. So since I got diagnosed and wrapped my head around everything, I've kind of created my own little mission that I'm going to spread awareness about the disease, not just about Parkinson's, but that it's not just for old people. And through that, I've had lots of really great opportunities to continue to use my business skills and feel like I'm contributing to society without being able to do an 8-to-5 job. So in March, I was elected to the board of directors for the Parkinson Society Maritime Region, which is great. I also work on the executive committee for the PEI chapter, and I work as an ambassador with the Canadian Parkinson Society to try and move forward issues that need legislation changes for all Canadians, but particularly those with health issues. So those things keep me busy. I also write a blog. I never considered myself to be a writer, and I had no intentions on ever sharing it. But I started writing it because I can't hold a pen to write, so it was more like a journal to me, and just to vent and get things off my chest. And after a couple of months, it occurred to me that maybe someone else is in that dark place of that 9-month stage I was in, that something's wrong and they can't figure it out. So I decided to share it. and much to my surprise, it's now read all over the world. The Michael J. Fox Foundation featured one of my blog articles, which was a pretty big honor because they're a huge foundation. The Parkinson Society of Canada did an interview on my horseback riding therapy and how it can benefit other people that have Parkinson's. And all kinds of crazy opportunities have come through that, which is great. I also work at trying to raise money for the Parkinson Society. Monies raised for them are used for research advocacy and programs for people with Parkinson's, which obviously are three things that are important to me and will continue to be so. And I try and laugh a lot. I make fun of myself a lot. Some people don't get my humor. Some people look twice like, is she really making a joke about that? But I think there's great therapy in laughter. And so hence my screw you Parkinson's kind of motto of life. I often say you picked the wrong chick to mess with, because I'm not just going to lay on the couch and get worse without a fight. So, and I've adopted Taylor Swift's song Shake It Off as my theme song. If I skip a dose of meds, I can do a mean dance to it without even trying. So, my kids even dance when they see it. Often my almost 7-year-old will say, Mom, you know, it's not really all that funny that you think that's your song. But anyway, she's gotten used to it. So anybody that's ever bored or counting sheep isn't working at night, you can check out my blog. There's all kinds of information there about my journey, but about education about Parkinson's. It's at natashachronicles.blogspot.ca. If you're looking for something worthy to support, the Parkinson Society does a super walk. It's similar to the Relay for Life. That happens in Charlottetown on September 13th. You can register a team, you can join as an individual walker, or you can look for our team, which is called Natasha's Ninjas. My Darlene McSwain actually named the team for me. So you can Google superwalk.ca and you'll get information on how to register for that. And our team is having a car wash on the 11th of July at the Montague Church of Christ if you need your car washed and want to help support our team. And that's about it. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to ask. Or...
I'm just curious, are there any peers around here, like the people you can talk to?
I'm always the youngest in a group everywhere I go. Parkinson's related.
Is there anybody else now going through what you're going through at your age? Or?
There are a couple of people on the island that are younger. Pat knows of one. I haven't met him. The president of the PEI chapter for the Parkinson Society, Dan Steele, he's married to Loretta Dixon. A lot of people know them. He has young onset Parkinson's. He's, I think, 4 years older than me. Yeah, well, they live in Cornwall, but he's married to Loretta Dixon, yeah. So he has young onset, so him and I see each other a lot at support group meetings and at chapter meetings as well. There are quite a few people in the Maritimes. We have a young onset Parkinson's conference call once a month, so that kind of enables that small group of people to kind of chat, but there aren't many of us, no. And the ones that there may be more, but a lot of times younger people with Parkinson's are in what I call the Parkinson's closet. They're scared about their bosses finding out or a bunch of other things, and they often tend to hide it, so, yeah. Anything else?
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming and talking to us. What courage you show.
Thank you.
And you're going to do a lot of good for other people who have Parkinson's.